Hi, I'm here today with Christopher Zannetos from Courion. Christopher's the president and the CEO of Courion. Christopher, just tell me, first of all, in terms of your product, I understand one of the good things that you do is you look at data and you look at the sensitivity of data and you deal with that appropriately. So tell me a bit more about that side of your product.
Sure. Well, first of all, what we focus on at Courion is what we call access assurance, helping our customers ensure that the right people have the right access to the right resources and they're doing the right things with that access. So when you start deconstructing that, right, in our industry, typically what we've done is we've focused on identity and access policy and entitlements, identity and access management. But increasingly, as identities become compromised, as we start having people access through handheld devices where you don't know whose hand it's in, you need to understand more to truly understand where the access risk is. And part of what you need to do is understand what they're doing it to.
Right.
So for example, are they doing it to data that doesn't really matter to you, or that's really sensitive, that's intellectual property, that's sensitive from a regulatory perspective, protected health information, credit card information.
Right.
So it's very important for us to begin to now pull data into the identity and access management world. And what we do is we connect up with systems that classify data, DLP, data loss prevention systems, that in a very general way go out, look across the infrastructure, categorize the data, classify it, and then we can then extend identity and access management technologies like certification to certify who has access to what data, not just who has access to what applications.
My experience at the moment still is that many organizations haven't got round to understanding their own classifications.
Well, actually, the interesting thing about data loss prevention is many companies have it, but they haven't deployed it. And they typically look to deploy it for data that's in motion through electronic mail, which they typically have deployed, and data at rest in data centers. But they haven't deployed it with data centers because they have so much data. So for example, Courion itself, 150-person organization, we have 2.4 million files in our file servers. Our customers, 40, 50,000 person organization, have 10,000 servers. If they were to turn DLP on to scan the entire environment, it would take them literally 5 years to scan one go-round for the entire organization. So many of the organizations have it and they have the ability, but it's more of what I would call a blunt instrument. It's buckshot and you can't actually use it unless you begin to focus it. And that's actually what we help to do. So when you start pulling together data classification, identity information, access information, you start getting more intelligence about access risk. So you can, for example, highlight a high-risk server, then focus DLP on that, instead of have DLP do all 10,000 servers in the environment.
And typically, in your experience, what sort of percentage of data do you end up classifying eventually?
That's a very good question. In the end, it's a very small percentage of the data, very, very small. But even more importantly, right, when you go out and you classify this data and you find, say, credit card information, it doesn't mean that it's high risk. If you look at that area of the infrastructure and determine that only the people who should have access to credit card numbers have access to that information, then it's not high risk. So when I come back to access assurance, what you need to bring together is identity information, entitlement information, policy, but you also have to bring in the classification so that you can understand, okay, there may be credit card numbers here, but it's not a high-risk area because only the accounts payable people have access to it.
So in terms of your User Activity Manager part of the tool, I understand that there's an element of it which deals with remediation. Now, what do you mean by remediation? What are the possibilities that someone using the system has got open to them?
Absolutely. So this, again, as I was discussing, is about bringing together all the elements of identity and access management. Not just the identity, not just the entitlements and the access policy, but the classification of the asset and activity to make sure that the right people have the right access to the right resources and they're doing the right things with that access. So once you find what people can access, typically in our industry, there are products like ours that automate certification and recertification. So you can find out who has access to what. Get it to the business manager, they can see who reports to them, who has access to what, should they, and they can confirm it. Well, it's even more important to be able to do that for who has accessed what. So they may have the access, but how have they used it? And once you figure out that they've used it potentially in the wrong way, you want to immediately take action in an automated way. So the remediation is going back to manage the entitlements and the access, so that when you see that someone is, in fact, say, a salesperson downloading customer files on a Saturday evening, and you're worried about the salesperson leaving the organization, right? You can immediately disable their accounts so they can no longer transfer any of that information. So remediation means once you find out that there's some suspicious activity, go back around and manage the access controls to stop the suspicious activity.
So the remediation part is the most important part, let's say 2 or 3 years down the road.
Well, I would say remediation is important actually at all times, but it will get more important because for customers to achieve this, absolutely, for customers to achieve this, they have to define their policies, and we've been working on that for some years, enforce the policies through access controls. We've been working on that in the industry for years, and actually remediating the access based on activity is a very new part of the market, and you see a lot of activity products out there, log aggregation systems, security incident and event management systems. Those are gathering that information. We now need to bring that into this framework, the IAM framework, to act on. So absolutely, you're right that organizations have hit the early stage issues, they've addressed those, and they're now moving on to these more advanced issues.